Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm CJ and today I want to talk about the Southern Reach Trilogy by Jeff VanderMeer. These books were published in 2014, all three of them published in the same year. You have Annihilation, Authority, and Acceptance. Jeff has confirmed he's writing a fourth book named Absolution, I believe, but it has not been released at the time of recording this. So today we'll be discussing them as a trilogy. I do want to talk some about the books without revealing too many spoilers for a little bit, so anyone that hasn't read them yet can get a feel for the vibe, but I will be diving into all of the books, including plot and character spoilers. Don't worry, I'll let you know when I get to the spoilers. I don't reveal too much to you. So, what genre are these? Well, it's basically a new genre Jeff invented where romance meets comedy. That's right, this rom-com's really gonna blow your mind, and I completely just lied to you. Yeah, this is a science fiction trilogy with horror and mystery elements woven throughout the narrative, with a touch of paranoia and existential dread, but in a fun way. Let me explain. Okay. We start Annihilation, our first book, with the introduction of our four characters: the biologist, the psychologist, surveyor, and anthropologist. Notice I did not use any names because we aren't given any. Our characters only know each other as their specific roles. These four characters are all women, and they're on an expedition to continue the government's investigation into the mysteries of Area X. So, how are we finding out about all this? Well, we're being told the story through a journal written by the biologist that details their group of four as they enter Area X while under hypnosis. We receive her account of the group exploring Area X, which includes a lighthouse with disturbing secrets, a tower that plunges into the earth, flora and fauna that don't seem native to this forgotten coast or really anywhere else on the planet. So, why are they hypnotized? Why can't they use each other's names? After all, anthropologist is quite the mouthful. What's with all the secrecy, and what the heck is Area X? Well, these answers are probably available if you read the trilogy. And if you have not read these and are interested, now is the time for you to click off as I dive deep into major spoilers for these books regarding plot and characters. But make sure to come back once you've finished them. So, I want to touch back on genre real quick before I get started and mention how complicated this book really is to nail down. Having a general categorization like science fiction is, probably correct, but there's so much going on with horror elements of the crawler and other creatures wielding the human anatomy like the dolphin or Whitby's Room of Terrors, and of course the inexorable border of Area X expanding outward, that we really have a genre bending story that Jeff pulls off quite well. It's also appropriate because a major idea in the story is about human thought processing and understanding how we compare and contrast new observations with prior knowledge and use analogies to break down new ideas to ourselves and others. And this way we can interpolate new or complicated ideas, but what happens when we experience the abstract, where extrapolation is the only option and the combined knowledge of scientists isn't enough to comprehend this new concept of Area X. So, in a way, these books skillfully play in many genres that make it more complicated than slapping a sci-fi label on it and moving on, which is something it's self-aware of, which is pretty cool. He also uses a pretty crazy writing style in these books, starting with the Annihilation, using the first person epistolary narrative in that journal format, and then moving into the third person, following Control and Authority, and then the finale, Acceptance, utilizing all three tenses with the director story presented in the second person. And I will say the second person style felt like something Jeff did just to kind of flex his writing muscles. It's kind of funny when I had just finished the second book hadn't picked up acceptance yet. I had a thought to myself like, oh, I wonder if this one's going to be written in the second person. And started reading it and laughed a little bit because I thought it was for a second. But it turns out there's a little bit of each. There's first, second, and third person in the last book. I was a little disappointed there wasn't a fourth wall type moment or like a reason we were told the director's story in second person. But it didn't really hold the book back that much because that storyline was really strong. The first book has such a fast pace using the first person journal. Our biologist really moves the story along, even with the exposition about her life researching in remote regions of the planet and her relationship with her husband and her parents. We still fly through this book. We're on page 25 when she inhales the spores and unravels our first mystery of the hypnotism, finding out there's more hypnotism beyond the border crossing into Area X, and she is no longer affected by it. We are also introduced to the Area X senses that are prevalent throughout the books. The rotting honey smell, which comes up a lot with Control's character and Authority, and the pinprick feeling that she gets when inhaling these spores, which is a similar feeling to Saul the Lighthouse Keeper's character and touching that flower or object that initiated Area X. So this is also a page that shows the biologist's way of thinking is unique, something the director or the psychologist, I'll probably refer to her as the director throughout most of this video, but it's something the director insisted to everyone at the Southern Reach, that she did have a unique way of thinking and was different than the others. So after breathing in the spores from the crawler's writing, some sort of fungi, I finally said, taking a deep breath to control my voice. The letters are made from fruiting bodies. Who knew if it were actually true? It was just the closest thing to an answer. And so with this little passage, she realizes early on that concluding anything is a mistake, with the surreal experience of words being written on the wall out of fruiting bodies or some sort of plant. We get a response to this from the anthropologist. She says, there is no recorded human language that uses this method of writing. Which, no shit, but this prompts our biologist to respond. I had to laugh. No, there is no animal that communicates in this way. So this snide remark once again reinforces the biologist as a competent character, but it shows how she's abrasive to the other people on the expedition with her. After this first encounter with the tower, the group is then hypnotized and returned to base camp, with our biologist having to follow the lead of the surveyor and anthropologist just to pretend that she's still affected so no one's onto her, which is kind of funny. Then we have the director hypnotizing the anthropologist and essentially sending her on a suicide mission to take a sample from the crawler, which that gets her killed. And eventually all the characters, they get split up, and the biologist starts to make her way to the lighthouse, which is loaded full of terrifying details. Discovering that trapdoor with the hundreds of journals was a huge moment that like physically gave me chills when reading it, which is awesome. And it's not like we ever felt trustworthy of this being the 12th expedition overall. We come to find out there's the 11 A, B, C, D, etc. But when you in this book find out that there's hundreds and hundreds of journals all stacked in this trapdoor, it's like they're piles of bodies. Just what's left over from these expeditions is like super chilling to just realize. And it's even more terrifying when we find her husband's journal and she finally reads it, that there are clones being made within Area X. We have a quote, but during the night they saw a ghastly procession heading into the tower. 7 of the 8 members of the 11th expedition, including a doppelganger of my husband and a surveyor. So something I can't quite figure out is why their expedition psychologist wasn't cloned. Not sure if the crawler turned him into a different creature, a regular animal or some other creature like a dolphin with a human eye. But at the time, it seemed somewhat significant. Even the biologist points it out, like, why are they not worried? The psychologist isn't there. And then in retrospect, it doesn't really have any significant implications. But either way, just finding out that there's clones and, like, what the heck does this even mean, is huge and terrifying. But what is happening with these clones? How are they made, and what are they doing? To answer how they're made, we have plenty of ambiguity, like everything else in the series, but we get a sense that Mr. Saul Crawler is part of the process and the scanning of the explorers and release of the clones into the world outside of Area X. At the end of Annihilation, the biologist is trying to escape when the crawler seemingly grabs hold of her, probes, scans, and I believe replicates her brain to be used for the creation of Ghostbird. She writes, "A raging waterfall crashed down on my mind, but the water was comprised of fingers, 100 fingers probing and pressing down into the skin of my neck and then punching through the bone of the back of my skull and into my brain. And then the pressure eased, even though the impression of unlimited force did not let up, and for a time, still drowning, an icy calm came over me, and through the calm bled a kind of monumental blue-green light. I smelled a burning inside my own head, and there came a moment when I screamed, my skull crushed to dust and reassembled, mote by mote." So this passage to me indicates an abstract description of the process being used by the crawler to create the clones for Area X. But why create clones of the explorers? Turn the original into an animal, a monster, or simply kill them? I think one aspect of these books that is equally frustrating and genius is the indeterminate conclusion of Area X's motives. Our characters never get to understand why this is happening, so why should we? What is the end game for this extraterrestrial region if it even has a conscience? We can guess a sort of total assimilation, whether it's with intent or just causality, that everything is to be touched by Area X, converted into an entity of its choosing, or recreated and sent forth as a sort of spy. There's also a possibility Area X is trying to communicate with Earth, but is doing it in a way that is clearly detrimental and inexorable in its takeover thus far. But maybe the crawler is creating replicas to allow for a commune between the two dimensions. After all, it did not kill the biologist. This idea is brought up at the end of Acceptance with the final confrontation between Gloria and Lowry, his cell phone from the first expedition being in the possession of Gloria after finding it in Area X. The unlikelihood of coincidence surrounding its discovery by Gloria and Whitby on their expedition, and the fact that it made it back safely to the Southern Reach. So was the intention to communicate with Lowry through this phone? Maybe a mastermind of sorts was allowing this sequence of events to take place so a discussion could occur between the Southern Reach and Area X with the retrieval of this phone. I think the biggest critique of this series comes with Book 2, Authority, and how it's an expositional info dump through the new acting director, Control. But we need this information to understand what is known by the Southern Reach, since so much was left out in the briefing of our biologist in Book 1. So we're given a tour of the Southern Reach facility, meet the staff, and early on have discussions with Cheney regarding the doorway being discovered, not creating. So a few things going on here. One, we see some arrogance from Control, his anger towards the expeditions being sent through this breach that was found, not created, anger at his own misinterpretation of this doorway, and anger at Grace for being vague and not specifically stating where this doorway came from. But in this scene, we're also introduced to the idea that there are multiple entities at play when it comes to Area X, one that created the zone and one that could be working to contain it. Another frightening concept: why was the doorway created? To let something in, out, or both? All of these are profound possibilities that Control brushes off with disdain for Cheney, suggesting he doesn't know what he's talking about. But if Area X is an accident occurring from a space-time wormhole or some other high-concept physics catastrophe manifesting as an invasion from another part of the universe, maybe something inside is making an effort to stop it, making an effort to communicate through a breach in the border, seeking collaboration. In an experiment performed 15 years prior, a group of white rabbits was forced across the border using a group of soldiers pushing them with riot gear. Control asked if any of the white rabbits that exist in the area are returnees from the experiment, something neither Whitby nor Cheney can answer. This reveals a sloppiness within the Southern Reach that irritates Control, but also shows it could be releasing infected or replicated white rabbits back to our side of the border without the Southern Reach or the rest of humanity knowing it. People are selling the white rabbits to pet stores like they're naturally occurring anomalies, when the reality of their existence could be much more horrifying. There's also a sort of superstition around the white rabbits. Soldiers working the containment zone won't eat them, but will shoot and eat the brown and white offspring from the marsh rabbits reproducing with the white rabbits. Whitby asks, why shoot any of them? Which could be a subconscious inclination to protect the Area X rabbits crossing back, considering his status as a possible Area X clone himself. But Control's thought response is, why not shoot all of them? Showing his thought process being reactive and rash rather than thoughtful. I really like this scene because on the surface it shows one of probably many experiments completed attempting to understand Area X, another fruitless test resulting in more problems that subtly reveal our character's thoughts and feelings. Speaking of Whitby being a possible clone, let's dig into that by looking a bit into the expedition with the former director Gloria and Acceptance, and then coming back to book 2. So Gloria counts hearing commotion in the upstairs part of the lighthouse during her and Whitby's expedition. She realizes there should be only one voice since there are only 2 of them. After racing to the top of the lighthouse, she finds Whitby hunched over, panting as a result of a skirmish with someone else that is nowhere to be found. Whitby never directly tells us what happened. The director actually imagines the scene and tells us in second person that there would have been a struggle in the watchroom on the journals until finally a snap of the neck, one of the Whitbys perishing. Here we have so many more questions generated than we could possibly answer, but this point in the story makes you think back to everything that's happened with Whitby. It's kind of like reading Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, discovering Mad-Eye Moody as Barty Crouch Jr., and then wanting to go back and reread it again to find all the hints and clues of his actual identity instead of him being Mad-Eye Moody. Except here we don't get a definitive answer. Going back to book 2, Authority, and searching for clues that Whitby is a replica will present some evidence that he probably is, but you never really get a definite answer. Maybe the original did kill the doppelganger, and he went mad because of it, making his behavior within the acceptable range of originality. Unfortunately, we don't know Whitby before the expedition, so his trapdoor room of horrors, weird behavior and comments, and the rancid honey smell could be results of the trauma derived from killing his replica and just how he ends up in the story as opposed to him being the Whitby doppelganger. So, the trapdoor room of horrors. We unknowingly have a hint at this scene when Control hears something late at night coming from the janitor's closet. He opens the door and describes Whitby jumping up like a trapdoor spider. They have an uncomfortable interaction, prompting Control to get out of the conversation as soon as possible, wary of being alone in the closet with them. Whitby goes on about multiple universes and how he takes comfort in the thought of solving the mystery of Area X in one universe, even if it's not the one they're in now. Control's response to this is pretty brutal, saying, "Perhaps it's your presence. Maybe without you here, we would have solved it already." Damn. That's pretty rough to say, especially to someone you're alone in a closet with late at night. Control eventually makes it out of this interaction after a little more small talk with Whitby, comfortably weaseling his way out. The big interaction then occurs when Control is curious about the janitor's closet again, wanting to get a look at it when maybe Whitby's not around. But he finds the trapdoor in the ceiling. And tucked away within this isolated chamber, he finds various paintings of people from the Southern Reach. The 11th Expedition psychologist painted as a giant hog and slug commingled. The director Gloria, a boar stuffed with vegetation, and Cheney, a jellyfish. Control then comes across his own portrait, incomplete but with the line work of a wild hare, and around him the outlines of a whale-like leviathan. Quote, he had been standing there, recognizing that there was a draft in the loft. He had been standing there without realizing that it wasn't a draft. Someone was breathing behind him. Someone was breathing on his neck. The knowledge froze him, froze the cry of "Jesus, fuck!" in his throat. He turned with incredible slowness, wishing he could seem like a statue in his turning, then saw with alarm a large, pale, watery blue eye that existed against a backdrop of darkness or dark rags shot through with pale flesh, and which resolved into Whitby. At first, Control thought that Whitby must be sleeping with his eyes open, a waxwork corpse, a tailor's dummy. Then he realized that Whitby was wide awake and staring at him, Whitby's body shaking ever so slightly like a pile of leaves with something underneath it, looking like something boneless shoved into a too small space, so close that Control could have leaned over and bit his nose or kissed it. Whitby continued to say nothing, and Control, terrified, somehow knew that there was a danger in speaking, that if he said anything, that Whitby might lunge out of his hiding place, that the stiff shifting of the man's jaw hid something more premeditated and deadly. Their eyes locked, and there was no way around the fact that each had seen the other, but still Whitby did not speak, as if he too wanted to preserve the illusion. Slowly, Control managed to direct his flashlight away from Whitby, stifling a shudder, and with a gritting of teeth overrode his every instinct not to turn his back on the man. He could feel Whitby's breath pluming out. Then there was a slight movement, and Whitby's hand came to rest on the back of his head, just resting there, palm flat against Control's hair. The fingers spread like a starfish and slowly moved back and forth, 2 strokes, 3, petting Control's head, caressing it in a gentle, tentative way. Control remained still. It took an effort. After a time, the hand withdrew with a kind of reluctance. Control took 2 steps forward, then another. Whitby did not erupt out of his space. Whitby did not make some inhuman sound. Whitby did not try to pull him back into the shelves. Oh my God. Yes, so when I first read this, it was just as freaky as reading it now for the second or third time. Just the description of this room, of the paintings, of how weird that Whitby is here, and just like inhuman almost, is really great imagery for keeping you up at night. And recording this now kind of late at night, it freaks me out a little bit. Just something about the randomness of like reaching out the hand and rubbing the back of Control's head just is super eerie and freaks me out. And I think this is good evidence Whitby is the doppelganger and not the original. There's trauma either way, which could manifest in this odd behavior. Either way, the living one in this situation had to kill the other, but this seems to be more of a major defect in his mental state that is, in my opinion, not quite human. It could be a defect in the replication process, because at this time we don't know how many people have been cloned. It's possible Whitby is the first, or one of the first, with the subsequent creations also having the mental problems or cancer like the biologist's husband. It's not until the biologist is replicated, that we see a fully functional and seemingly normal version of these in Ghostbird. So there's a few more themes and ideas consistent throughout the books I want to touch on. One is how the entirety of this scenario is played out and why I believe it is incredibly devastating in its realisticness. It's no secret that there are intelligence agencies within most governments, but especially the United States, that would create an entity exactly like the Southern Reach and have the same result. Not to say in this scenario it could theoretically be figured out and saved, but Central would create an organization with directors and heads of departments granted their positions based on their experience from something that has no translation to what is occurring. Looking at how this scenario plays out with Lowry behind the scenes in charge and pulling strings, sabotaging the work of the scientists due to personal vendettas and arrogance, using hypnotism and blackmail to ensure his control over the Southern Reach, this is just another terror presented in the story that's quite relatable, putting aside the fictional elements of the story. The only reason Lowry has his position is because he suffered through an unfathomable nightmare in the first expedition, the only member to return home. This launched the man into an untouchable status, which, paired with his personality, leads to the manipulation, lies, and paranoia that plagues the Southern Reach, leading to more assimilation of Earth on Area X's terms. The director tells us she feels this way about Lowry, saying he's, quote, a prisoner of war who thinks just because he suffered he knows a lot. The implication here that nobody knows what is happening, and the people that are put in power have agendas and corrupted data and views based on their own experiences, the director included, which is how they obtain these positions in the first place. 38 expeditions total, 37 that Lowry trained and prepared, used hypnotism, used without disclosing the realistic expectations of their mission, what they were truly up against, and that they were probably on a one-way trip. I also find the time dilation or differentiation element of the story fascinating. We find out that time in Area X is not synchronized with the rest of Earth. Control flees the Southern Reach as the border expands, travels to find Ghostbird, and they together enter Area X no more than 2 weeks later. They meet up with Grace on Failure Island, where she reveals it has been 3 years since the Southern Reach was sieged by the expanding border of Area X. We are led to believe within Area X, the constellations of stars do not match what should be in the night sky, meaning it could somehow be Earth, but in a different part of the universe, altering time-space as we know it on Earth. We are given a glimpse of this unknowingly in the first book when the biologist mentions to us, the stars I saw now look strange, strewn across the dark in chaotic new patterns, where just the night before I had taken comfort in their familiarity. Was I only now seeing them clearly? Was I perhaps even farther from home than I had thought? And then in the third book, she says, what is the nature of my delusion? Am I hallucinating when I see the night sky that I know, or when I see the one that is strange? Which stars should I trust and navigate by? So, having an unrecognizable night sky indicates a vast distance removed from Earth that creates this time differentiation that is experienced faster than everyone on the outside of Area X. So this is one reason why everything appears so dilapidated as described by the expeditions. The quote about the stars is from one of the final entries by the biologist we're actually given in book 3, the end of her story being told by her journal, which was found by Grace on Failure Island. A lonely and tragic portrayal of sorrows and regrets she has toward her husband, who she thinks has been converted into an owl and has been her only companion. We learn she's been living on Failure Island for 30 years, and once the owl passes away, she shortly thereafter stops the journal entries, assuming she will be turned into a horrific beast for resisting Area X so long. Not so long after, in the book that is, Grace, Control, and Ghostbird meet the biologist as her transformed self, the Leviathan. One of Whitby's deranged portraits have this distorted whale creature depicted, which indicates a mental connection with Area X leaking outside the confines of the supposed border. He also predicts the conversion of Control into a hare, which towards the end of Acceptance comes to fruition. It says, he sniffed the air, felt under his paws the burning and heat, the intensity, and then he leaps into the light at the bottom of the tower like a rabbit would. So these two, which were told to us in the second book, that portrays the Leviathan whale-like creature that the biologist turns into, and has the sketches, the outlines of the hair, and the last we see of Control, it says that he is John Rodriguez. He is no longer Control, and he's described as having paws and leaping into the light at the bottom of that tower. So definitely some connection with Whitby, which is another reason I think that he is part of Area X. He is that doppelganger Whitby. And the final idea I want to hit on is the crawler, the lighthouse keeper, Saul Evans. I didn't really get into his whole story that much, but I think the biggest thing is to just go into his description as given by Jeff as the crawler. We are given the description by the biologist, which I think makes the story hit the existential Lovecraftian horror story beat in a more intimate way than just the big idea of Area X slowly consuming the earth. There's something extremely intimate about the meeting of this creature and how extremely confusing it is just to experience. So in Annihilation, page 178, the crawler kept changing at a lightning pace as if to mock my ability to comprehend it. It was a figure within a series of refracted panes of glass. My eyes kept glancing off of it as if an optic nerve was not enough. Within this fractured mass, within all of these different impressions of the crawler, half blinded but still triangulating through my other senses. What can you do when your 5 senses are not enough? Because I still couldn't truly see it here, any more than I had seen it under the microscope, and that's what scared me the most. This is a beautifully written, indescribable horror. He articulates so well the experience of a creature, so incomprehensible and overpowering to the senses, that you have the feeling you could not hope to defeat it. All we have is acceptance and the hope for mercy. Well, I think that's where I'll end my discussion of these books. I really can't wait to see what happens in the 4th book. I might revisit these again before it comes out. If you made it to the end of this, I appreciate you sticking around. Let me know if there are any major things I didn't discuss that you thought were noteworthy. I really did only scratch the surface of the story. There's so many other small hidden elements to the story, and probably some large story beats that I didn't get into. I mean, there's a ton of searching for clues to find out who is or isn't a doppelganger, and a completely different read if you assume, oh, this person is or isn't. And there's just a fun theory of Whitby is or isn't, or is Gloria the director, or is Lowry a doppelganger or not. And there's also just a lot of fun stuff on the internet, on Reddit to dig into. So I guess until we get that 4th book, we got some more digging and thinking to do. But let's get out of here. I'll see y'all next time.